Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So if you've been following this page for a while, you know that I like to give out scorching hot takes, but I also like every month or so to hear from you guys what your hot takes are. So we're going to go through it right now. You got to submit this over on my Instagram. I post a story, and Beyond Hockey, and you guys send it in. Want to get you guys involved in these kind of videos. So we're going to go through it now, and I'm going to let you know whether you are absolutely out of your mind or I could potentially see this happen. Let's get into it. Up first from Joe Halleck 15. Sorry if I'm botching your name, but if Columbus makes the playoffs, Zach, I assume Werenski, is a top 3 Hart finalist. And I think he should definitely, even regardless of what happens, get maybe some Hart votes. If they make the playoffs, yeah, I can understand where you're coming from. It's going to be interesting. Would you put him ahead of a Connor Hellebuyck, Nikita Kucherov, Nathan McKinnon, Leon Draisaitl? McDavid's now out for another 3 games to bring his total to 7. It's possible. Quinn Hughes is obviously balling out. If they make the playoffs, I wouldn't hate it. Would he be my personal pick to win it if they make the playoffs? Probably he'd have to get like 95, 100 points to win it, because I don't think that it should just be... I hate when the Hart kind of devolves into this, oh, if you remove this player from said team, they miss the playoffs. Obviously, Columbus would not be, they would not be close to making the playoffs without Zach Werenski. But using that logic to then discredit somebody like Connor Hellebuyck or Leon Draisaitl and say their team still would be in the playoffs or have a chance at making the playoffs even if you remove them, I don't like it when it kind of devolves into that. But I do think Zach Werenski is building himself a strong Hart case, considering he has been a top defenseman in the entire NHL. And although guys like Marchenko and Monahan are playing like elite players, they don't really have elite track record the last couple of years. So yeah, he's been great. I could see the Hart finalist. I think a top 5 finish, I would probably say, if they end up making the playoffs. I'm not sure I would go fully top 3 as of right now. Next up, from Landon Diaco, Devils end up a wild card team. Now, when looking at this, the teams that would have to pass them in terms of them falling out of that 3rd Metro spot, it would have to be the Rangers or Columbus. I don't see it happening personally. I think the Rangers is a possibility. They've actually been playing pretty solid hockey. I think they're like 6-0-3 in their last 9 or something like that. Against they were really falling apart, and then they were entering this really hard stretch, and they've actually kind of risen to the occasion, I got to be honest. So I could see maybe the Rangers passing them. I'm not sure Columbus will. I still think the Devils are going to be a playoff team, no doubt, and I think that they are going to bounce back. But I guess I could see that happening, considering the Rangers are playing very good and Columbus isn't that far back. Pittsburgh, Islanders, they're not. Philadelphia, they're not catching the Devils, obviously. So if it comes down to those 2 teams, I'm still picking the Devils pretty safely as of right now. Alex Brandt, the Wild don't make the playoffs. And yes, the Wild are injured as shit right now. If there was a more legit 9-seed team right now, and the Canucks also weren't like a dumpster fire, I could see this Minnesota team falling out and finishing at like 96, 95 points. But considering the West is kind of shit outside of the top 8, and that's including Vancouver figuring out their stuff, I think Minnesota's pretty safely going to make the playoffs. Not going to be contending probably for the Central Division, but I think they finish around 99, 100, 101 points. They've built up enough in terms of their amazing start to kind of coast down the stretch, where I don't see a Calgary, Utah, or St. Louis catching Minnesota at this point. Next up, Giovanni Bozo says, Lane Hudson and Norris finalists 2 seasons from now. I could maybe see 3 or 4 seasons from now, but I think the next 2 seasons, if Quinn Hughes and Cale Makar are healthy, you can basically pencil them in for 2 of those Norris final spots. I tend to think that the Rangers are going to bounce back next season, or bounce back at the end of this season. And I think next season and the season after that, Adam Fox will have a very good chance of winning the Norris. Rasmus Dahlin, if the Sabres can have a half-decent season, will be in Norris conversations. Miro Heiskanen's obviously going to be in the mix if his offense rebounds. I can't see it the next 2 years, is basically what I'm saying. There's too many elite 23 to 27-year-old defensemen. I think, again, 3, 4, 5 seasons, once those guys maybe start going down in terms of the aging curve and Lane Hudson just continues to get better, I could see it happening. He'd have to have like a 90-point season at this point in 2 years to be a Norris finalist, which I'm not sure that's going to happen, or if that's even enough to get a Norris finalist, considering the monster numbers. I forgot to mention Zach Werenski, who we talked about before, absolutely balling out. From Nick Bellariev, Capo Caco will be a 70 to 75 point player. I don't know about this, just because I still think Berkeley Cannon is eventually going to be a first liner for the Seattle Kraken. You hope Matty Beniers bounces back in a big way. I think he's probably going to be a very, very good second liner, around 55 to 65 points. It is very impressive what he is doing right now in Seattle. But, I mean, although New York maybe should have thrown him with Artemi Panarin or something, but we saw him with guys like Zibanejad and Kreider for a prolonged period of time where he just didn't really show up. He's having a great stretch, and I think he's going to be a very good player, but to massively overreact after like 14, 15 games in Seattle, and he's been great when I've seen him with Seattle, but I can't fully switch up after such a small sample size. I still think the ceiling for him is probably around 60, 65 points, although that would be great for Seattle. Don't get me wrong. Next up, Ryland Toschuk. I'm botching these names right now. McKinnon has been better than Draisaitl for the past 2 years and should have been number one, referencing my top 50 players in the entire NHL. If you haven't seen that yet, go check it out. And I think in that video, I specifically said the last 2 regular seasons, Nathan McKinnon has been better than Connor McDavid. 140-point season with 51 goals. McDavid only had 32 goals, 100 assists, 132 points. This season, Nathan McKinnon is playing better, I'd argue as well. But again, McDavid had like the best 21st century, by far the best 21st century playoff run by a single player. You can't deny that. Not saying Nathan McKinnon played bad in the 2024 playoffs, but when you have such a historic run from Connor McDavid, and outside of that, McDavid has outperformed McKinnon basically every single regular season from like 2021 to 2023. You still got to go with Connor McDavid. He's just such a generational talent. I think, again, if McKinnon finishes this season out and wins the Art Ross and has as good, if not better, of a postseason than McDavid, I will hear your arguments then. I will definitely hear it. I don't even know if that would be enough to put McKinnon over McDavid for me, but I would hear arguments. I think after what we saw last spring, it's still pretty easily Connor McDavid. But McKinnon has definitely solidified himself as a no doubt number 2. I can't really hear arguments for Draisaitl, Matthews, Makar, Hughes, Kucherov over Nathan McKinnon at this point. Next up, Nikki, what are these last names? Svaki, 27. Utah makes it over Vancouver. If Utah can get healthier with some of their defensemen hopefully coming back in the near future, it's possible. I think Vancouver is going to trade JT Miller and kind of just lock in after that. But given the health of Thatcher Demko, and even when he has played, he has been kind of ass. I think he has like an 871. I could definitely see this happening. I think Utah's probably going to finish ahead of a Calgary. I know I've been saying Calgary's going to fall off at some point, and it has not happened. But yeah, I think Utah is definitely a dangerous team. We saw them at the start of the season play great. Then they kind of fell off a little bit, but they're back on the upswing, and they're definitely somewhat of a threat in the Western Conference. And again, if Vancouver just keeps on being mid as hell and a disaster, I could see that happening. Wouldn't bet on it. I still have Vancouver in the playoffs, but that's a decent hot take. Next up, Ryan, this is a French name, Lecomte. Logan Thompson wins the Vezina. Definitely a hot take. On a per-game basis, you could make an argument. I think in terms of the goals saved above expected, he's on the same level of Connor Hellebuyck. The only problem is Connor Hellebuyck has played like 10 more games than Logan Thompson at this point. And although I think that Connor Hellebuyck, because he plays in Winnipeg, won't be in Hart discussions when comparing Logan Thompson to Connor Hellebuyck, an established name like Connor Hellebuyck, they're obviously going to be more willing to vote for a guy like Connor Hellebuyck. So if Logan Thompson down the stretch, what do the Capitals have? Like 35, 37 games remaining. If he plays 28 of those games, 30 of those games, and gets to 55-ish games on the season, and he has a 924 and 925, and Connor Hellebuyck comes back down to earth, it'll definitely be a debate. Do I think that's going to happen? Probably not. Connor Hellebuyck is just that good, and might end up being a unanimous Vezina winner. Liam McKay, thankfully, about an easy name. Back to basics. All Canadian teams make the playoffs, and yeah, this is a serious possibility at this point, considering the way that the Ottawa Senators and Montreal Canadiens are playing. At this point, it's possible that, like, imagine saying before the season, like, 6 out of the 7 Canadian teams are going to make the playoffs, and Vancouver might be the one that ends up missing. I'm trying to think in the West, how does Calgary and Vancouver make it? Does that mean one of Minnesota, Colorado, Dallas fall out? Probably. LA is not going to fall out. Vegas not going to fall out. Edmonton's not going to fall out. And I don't think any of those Central teams are. So I think that's probably your biggest snag, even ahead of the Eastern Conference teams. I don't think that Montreal is going to make it at this point, but I think just getting those 2 Canadian teams in the Western Conference, 6 out of 7, decently likely. 6 out of 7, I would say that there's like a 35% chance at this point. All 7, probably like 5%, just given that Western Conference factor. Next up, Edmonton, 88. JT Miller will be a Vegas Golden Knight. Imagine that. I don't think this is going to happen just because it's an in-division trade. And yes, we saw Tomas Hertl get traded to Vegas, but that's 2 teams on rapidly different timelines. Vegas the next 3 to 4 years. San Jose wants to be competing in the next 3 to 4, or Vegas has to win in the next 3 to 4 years. San Jose is not going to have any serious expectations for another 3 to 4 years. So I think that factors in. I don't know what a package would be in terms of going back. It might have to be like Tomas Hertl going to Vancouver for JT Miller, because they're obviously going to want some sizable center, maybe William Karlsson. I couldn't really see them trading William Karlsson. But yeah, if they were in a different division, I could see something like this. The Vegas Golden Knights, the villains that they are in a lot of people's eyes, go out and get a guy like JT Miller. But I think that the in-division is just too big of a factor. These teams are hopefully going to be playoff rivals for the next half decade. Liam Borman, Seth Jarvis will go down as the greatest Hurricane of all time. In order for this to happen, he would have to eclipse Sebastian Aho. That's definitely going to be a tall task. Sebastian Aho is a top 20 to 30 player in the entire NHL. I think Sebastian Aho is probably trending to turn into the greatest Hurricane of all time. Right now, it's either Eric Stahl, Cam Ward, or Rod Brindamore. But if Aho wins the Stanley Cup and is there for his entire career, 15, 17 seasons or something like that, 1,100, 1,200 career points compared to Brindamore and Stahl, who weren't there the entire time. Cam Ward wasn't exactly Vezina level every single time. I back to Seth Jarvis. I can't pencil him in to be a top 30 player of all time if that's what you're asking. That's what Sebastian Aho has been the last 3 to 4 years, and I think that's what he's going to be for another 3 to 4 years. So I like it. It's a very hot take. I think the way that Seth Jarvis has performed both ways of the ice, it's possible, but unlikely. I like that take. I think it's definitely interesting, though. Next up, Mitchell Taylor, 32. Pettersson is the issue, not Miller. And I could definitely understand someone saying, I'd rather keep JT Miller. He's physical. He's more built for the playoffs. Pettersson, definitely more skilled, better two ways, but is kind of soft. It's just when you factor in age, it's not really that much of a debate. A 26-year-old versus a 32-year-old. I'm going to pick the 26-year-old guy that does have that more complete two-way game that fits in with your other franchise superstar in Quinn Hughes. You're picking Pettersson every day of the week, especially with JT Miller. He has been known to be a little bit of a hothead in the locker room, not liked by all. You got to trade JT Miller compared to Elias Pettersson, especially Elias Pettersson. His trade value at 11.6. You're not getting that much for him at this point. Someone would give up a decent amount, but just move off JT Miller, who his contract could be a negative asset in a couple of years, considering he's 32 years old and has like 5 years left at $8 million. Next up, Henry Mahone. Gavin McKenna will be Crosby level. We're talking a top 10 greatest player of all time. In terms of the CHL production, he is producing similarly to a Sidney Crosby. I think Sidney Crosby was slightly above 2 points per game. McKenna right now has 70 points in 35 games in the WHL. I can't go quite there for McKenna. I would say he could end up being Nathan McKinnon level, top 3 player in the NHL. I think that's definitely possible. And even though he didn't light up the score sheet at World Juniors, I thought he was arguably Team Canada's best forward as a goddamn 16-year-old. So I think he's going to be a very special talent. I hope he goes to college next year so we get to see him not just like put up 2.5, maybe sniffing 3 points per game in the WHL. I don't think that would be best for his development. Go play against older and better competition in college. I'm not ready at 16. I think now he's 17 years old. But to anoint this guy as Sidney Crosby 2.0. Let's not do that quite yet. To start next year, I'll start ripping off Gavin McKenna hot takes in his draft year, but he's a very special talent. He's going to be, when he gets drafted in 2026, he's probably going to be the second most hyped prospect of the last decade from 2017 to 2026, without a shadow of a doubt. Connor Bedard's the only other guy. Rasmus Dahlin had a lot of hype. Jack Hughes had a lot of hype. Macklin Celebrini had a lot of hype, but he has truly dominated the CHL, only like we've seen other legends like Connor McDavid, Connor Bedard, and Sidney Crosby. Thus far, Mason Matson, 9. Kaprizov comes back from his injury and wins the Hart. I would love to see this. I had Kaprizov as my dark horse Hart pick, second in my ballot, only behind Connor McDavid, basic-ass me. But at this point, he's going to miss at least 13 games. He's only going to play 69 games on the season. I look back on it, and based on what I could find, the only guy to ever win the Hart non-goalie playing less than 70 games is Mario Lemieux or the most recent guy is Mario Lemieux in 1993 when he had like 160 points in those 60 games. So yeah, I think the injuries are just too much for Kirill Kaprizov. I think on a per game basis, arguably the most valuable player in the entire NHL this year, but missing 13 games, which for him would have been 9 goals, 11 assists or something like that. That's just going to be too massive unless other players, which I don't want to see happen, get hurt on a same level. Kaprizov's basically done. It's ridiculous that he's still like 8-1 to win the Hart on most books. Wish I could bet the opposite side of that. CMAC 336699. Germany will be a better hockey nation than Finland in the next 10 years. And I can see where you're coming from on this, considering Germany has been pumping out elite talent in the last decade. Leon Draisaitl in 2014, Seider, Stützle, Peterka. It has been very impressive what they have done. If you say 25 years from now, I can maybe see where you're coming from. Germany is just so much bigger than Finland, 85 million people compared to like 5 million. But I still think Finland, although I criticize them for not pumping out like the star talent that they have in years past, they're still pumping out a bunch of draft picks every single year. Germany, it's weird. Like Germany, there's not a ton of German NHLers, but the ones that make the NHL are damn good players. Like their quality over quantity is crazy versus Finland the last 5 years, since 2019 basically, has been more so quantity versus quality. So no, I don't see this happening in the near future. 15, 20, 25 years as people continue, Germany sees their stars, and that inspires kind of a golden generation, which I guess you could say could happen in the next 10 years. But I still think there'd have to be massive investments from Germany as a country into hockey because just not enough people really play right now in their junior system. It's not like it's anything special compared to Liga, which has the U20 leagues. Not the same. I am going to stick with Finland as of right now. And then lastly, Easton Medved 10. Seattle won't make the playoffs again until the 30s, the 2030s. That is trippy to read, the 30s. But yeah, I could maybe see this happening. I'm not going to lie. When looking at them, they're not close to the playoffs this year. They just signed guys like Chandler Stevenson and Brandon Montour to massive contracts, although I really like a pickup like Capo Caco. It's not looking good. They're going to need Berkeley Cat and Furcus to really turn into studs, Edward Chalet, in the near future, else this team just looks doomed to mediocrity. And again, they have some of those long-term deals locked up where you got Adam Larson, an extension kicking in for him for like 4 years after this season. They're in a really bad spot. At least like Joey Decord has established himself as a top 15, top 12 goalie in the entire NHL. That's one of the positives. But besides that, man, it's not looking good. I would maybe bet on them sneaking in one season, similarly to what they did in 2023. But again, they're missing this year. Then they only have 4 more shots in the 2020s to make the playoffs. So yeah, I think it might be onto something there, unless they somehow get the first overall pick, Adam Matthew Schaefer. That could maybe change my outlook for them the next 3 to 4 years. But it's really bad for the Seattle Kraken if you're a Kraken fan right now. I feel bad for you. After that 2023 season, it has basically been all downhill. But let me know in the comments. That's it. Those are the 16 that we went through. Let me know in the comments, what was your favorite hot takes from these? What are some of your hot takes? I'll let you know if you're crazy or not. And I'll be seeing you in the next one. Thank you for everybody that submitted it. Peace.